Hello, brothers and sisters, and welcome to day 191 of the Chronological Read Through the Bible. Today's reading covers Psalm 107 and then 111 through 114. Now, I want to look at Psalm 107 this evening. It is a powerful psalm, and I have to confess I forget about it at times, but it speaks of a great plan for redemption. And in this psalm, we really find the Hebrew people at their time of exile, but the Lord is starting to draw the people back, to bring those who have been in wilderness and the hiding, or those who have been as prisoners in chains. He is starting to draw the people back. So this is going to speak of really 7 different principles. So we have God's loving mercy on his people, which is spoken of in this psalm, God's guidance, him leading his people, and then we have the deliverance. We have him delivering his people from the various circumstances which they have found themselves in. And then we have a healing, a restoration, if you will. The Lord speaks of the protection which he has given to the people and will give them on their return journey, really is covered here. He's restoring the people, and then it speaks of eternal salvation. We have a number of really strong messianic phrases which are used here. Strong messianic sense to this psalm, speaking, that is, of Christ. It is a foretelling of what the Lord is going to do with us. The psalmist begins by praising God in this psalm, and especially for his covenant of love and his mercy in redeeming and gathering an undeserving people. That really is speaking of us in many ways. It's not just speaking of those who are in exile at this time, but we are an undeserving people. And I think that is really what is a powerful point to this psalm. And that's a part of what I was struck by. I had really forgotten of how this psalm really speaks to that really undeserving position that we've been in before we were saved, and even undeserving of his continuing grace. The Lord is so long-suffering with us, which I spoke of just the other day. And yet, what grace he has shown us from the very beginning of our salvation up to today in our walk with him. And it's so awesome just to see what the Lord is doing in our lives and has done in our lives and will do in our lives, and especially those whom he still reaches out to. Well, I want to read just a few verses here. Verse 1 of Psalm 107, "Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his loving kindness is everlasting. Let the redeemed of the Lord say so, whom he has redeemed from the hand of the adversary, and gathered from the lands, from the east, and from the west, and from the north, and from the south." When I served as a missionary in Belize, there was a older gentleman who had been raised in Germany. Even during World War II, his parents were members of the Church of the Brethren, which did come under persecution, not as harsh as other groups, but they were persecuted under the Nazi regime. And he himself, though, had been swayed into his teen years joining with the Hitler Youth. And he said a part of what started waking him up was how his superiors kept trying to get him to spy and even turn in his own parents. But I asked him, what was the one thing that really solidified waking him up to the power of God and him changing his life to surrender to Jesus? And he said, it was when the Hebrew nation in 1948 was restored. He said when Israel came back to being a nation, and he saw Jewish people being gathered from all the lands which they had been banished to, he said he could not help but think of this very passage of Scripture and how the Lord was gathering the people from the east and the west and the north and the south and restoring them to their homeland. And he said at that, he knew that God was real. And he said watching the excitement that his father had at that time in seeing prophecy fulfilled. And he was one of the first people that it really stuck with me as he said and pointed out that prior to 1948, there was no direct prophecy that he could see in Scripture. But 1948 changed everything. And I hope that you realize the significance of that. And that's a part of where I just hadn't even really thought about connecting some of this verse lately. I quote it at times, but I don't quote it with the address and with the other wonderful parts of it here. It says, they wandered in the wilderness in a desert region. They did not find a way to inhabit the city. They were hungry and thirsty. Their soul fainted within them. Then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble. And what did the Lord do? He delivered them out of their distress. You know, we find this over and over again, especially when I think of whether it was the time that the Hebrews were in Egypt and they cried out to the Lord and he sent them a deliverer in Moses, or whether it's during the time of Judges when they were disobedient to the Lord and he punished them by sending foreign armies in to invade their land, and they would cry out to God and he would send a judge to deliver. We at times, especially some of those who are in persecuted lands today, are at a point of crying out to the Lord. And there is always a remnant. There will always be those who are faithful to the Lord. And you may be one of those who is faithful to the Lord. And one of the jobs of the faithful is to point those who have wandered away, those who have ignored God altogether, even those who do not know Him, to point them to Him and say, in this time of distress, this is when we call upon Him. I want you to consider that. I want you to consider the role that you may play in the coming times before us. Verse 8, let them give thanks to the Lord for His loving kindness and for His wonders to the sons of men. For He has satisfied the thirsty soul, and the hungry soul He has filled with what is good. God's going to give us what is good. And I don't mean this to sound like a name and claim it, but the things that the Lord gives us are perfect. The Lord's timing is perfect. And I have learned throughout my life, and it's not to say it's always perfect. I don't always just say, well, you know, I'm not going to be concerned about this because it's going to all happen in the Lord's timing. But every time that the events come about, it is in the Lord's timing. Maybe it's you're preparing to go on a trip and you're like, I don't even have the funds for it. And you start to stress out a little bit, but then you come to realize it always comes together in the perfect time of the Lord. Well, brothers and sisters, I hope that you've had a good day, and I do pray that the rest of your evening and morning time as well, depending on what time you're watching this, is blessed. Till tomorrow, God bless.